I want you to picture this. It is, let's say 4:45 p.m. on a Friday. You are just completely exhausted.
We have all been there.
Right. But you sit there and you type out this carefully crafted, highly detailed, like 3-paragraph email to a colleague. You are outlining a really complex project that absolutely has to launch next week.
Sounds stressful already.
It is. So you hit send, you take a deep breath, and you start packing up your bag. 10 minutes go by, your inbox pings. You open it, and their entire response is just one word: fine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no punctuation, no sign-off, no context, just fine. What is the very first thing your physical body does in that moment?
I mean, your heart rate probably spikes instantly. Your jaw clenches.
Yeah, and your brain immediately spins a story, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you were like most of us, you instantly assume they are out to get you. You sit there thinking, they're dismissing me. They're being incredibly passive-aggressive.
Right. This is a deliberate insult.
Yes. But to stop ourselves from spiraling in those exact moments, we often reach for this famous mental model called Hanlon's razor. You might have heard it. The maxim goes, never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity.
Or sometimes you hear it phrased as incompetence or ignorance.
Right. And on the surface, it sounds like a folky little rule for just, I don't know, being a polite, patient human being. But okay, let's unpack this, because the sources we are looking at today, these excerpts from a really brilliant piece called The Hanlon Paradox, Navigating Intent and Accountability, they reveal there is just so much more going on under the hood.
Oh, absolutely.
Our mission for this deep dive is to completely deconstruct this famous mental model, because it turns out it is actually a deeply complex cognitive tool.
Yeah, and I know it sounds crazy to connect a passive-aggressive office email to, like, international cyber warfare.
A little bit, yeah.
But the neurochemistry driving our reactions to both is actually remarkably similar. That is the journey we are taking today. We are going to guide you through this unexpected spectrum. We are starting with the biological wiring of our own brains, moving through the specific dangers of texting and email, and eventually scaling all the way up to how international diplomats and military analysts use, and actually refuse to use, this exact same paradox.
Okay, so to understand why someone even needed to invent a rule like Hanlon's razor in the first place, we have to look inward first. Like, why is my brain so hardwired to assume the worst?
That is the big question.
Right. Why did I instantly assume my colleague hated me because of the word fine instead of just, assuming they were really busy?
Well, that reaction comes down to a psychological concept called the fundamental attribution error.
The FAE.
Exactly. To break it down simply, your brain is a pattern-seeking machine, but it operates on a very strict energy budget. It is always looking for shortcuts.
Because it's lazy.
Psychologists call it cognitive economy, but yeah, basically. Your brain is a stingy accountant trying to save calories. So, when a negative outcome happens, an ignored email, a dropped ball on a project, your brain needs an explanation.
And it needs it fast.
Right. It needs it immediately to assess the threat level. And the most obvious, visible piece of data right in front of you is the person who committed the act.
The person is right there. They sent the email, so they must be the entire problem.
Exactly. And because you only see the person, what remains totally invisible to you are the situational constraints.
Oh, okay.
You cannot see that their server just crashed, or, that their boss just doubled their workload, or even something purely physical, like maybe they slipped on a wet floor while typing on their phone.
Oh, man, yeah. I guess I've sent some weird text while tripping on the stairs.
Right. You just see the failure. And when that failure is unpleasant to us, this bias metastasizes into something called the hostile attribution bias. We do not just assume they are clumsy or unlucky. We take this massive leap to the assumption that it was a deliberate attack.
And when you assume someone is attacking you, you fight back. Which brings us to the neurochemical hack part of the source material.
Yes, the hack.
How does reciting Hanlon's razor actually change what is happening inside my head?
Think of it as a metacognitive intervention, which is just a fancy way of saying it's a way of thinking about your own thinking.
Okay, I like that.
When you perceive an attack, your brain experiences what we call an amygdala hijack.
Right, the fire alarm.
Exactly. The amygdala is essentially your brain's internal fire alarm. When it goes off, it floods your entire system with cortisol and adrenaline. It throws you into this highly reactive fight-or-flight state. Psychologists call this System 1 processing. It is fast, it's automatic, and it's highly, highly emotional.
So applying Hanlon's razor forces you to pause.
Yes, it forces you to engage System 2 processing, which is the slower, more analytical, logical part of your brain, up in the prefrontal cortex.
So by consciously telling myself, wait, they aren't evil, they might just be overwhelmed, I am literally shutting off the fire alarm.
You are. You are actively dropping your cortisol levels. You move a potential conflict from a state of outrage to a state of curiosity.
That's a great distinction. Outrage versus curiosity.
Right, because outrage makes you ask, who did this to me? Which demands retaliation. Curiosity makes you ask, how did this happen? Which demands a solution. And by removing that villain narrative, you build what the author calls a golden bridge for the offending party.
A golden bridge.
Yeah, you give them a way to save face. They don't have to admit they are a terrible person. They just have to admit they made an error.
That makes so much sense. But if the brain relies heavily on reading a situation to stop that internal fire alarm, what happens when we remove physical context completely? I mean, the source material talks about the digital attributional vacuum and the cyber negativity effect. It seems like texting and emailing would just make this whole process a complete nightmare.
Oh, it really does. We call things like texting and email lean mediums.
Lean mediums.
Yeah, because in face-to-face communication, you are constantly receiving this rich, massive data stream. You hear the tone of voice, you see the subtle facial microexpressions, you notice their posture. That is your paralinguistic ground truth.
Right, you have all the clues.
But when you strip all of those cues away in an email or a Slack message, your brain is starved of context. And because negative events are so much more critical to our survival, the default bias in a digital vacuum is to assume negative intent just to protect yourself.
You know, it is like driving in the dark without headlights.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Your brain just starts hallucinating monsters on the side of the road because it cannot actually see what is out there. And Hanlon's razor feels like it should be the headlights in that scenario. But, and here's where I struggled with the text a bit, the text suggests we should introduce intentional friction to our tech to help with this.
Right, slowing things down.
Yeah, they give the example of forcing people to leave voice memos for emotionally loaded topics rather than typing them out. And I have to push back on that.
Fair enough.
I mean, in a fast-paced corporate environment where speed is king, who is actually going to stop and record a voice memo every single time a project hits a snag?
Yeah.
That feels like it would never survive the real world.
What's fascinating here is that you are highlighting the exact tension between efficiency and what the sources call epistemic hygiene.
Epistemic
Yes.
accuracy.
Our digital platforms are optimized purely for speed, right? They are not built for accurately inferring human intent. And to stick with your driving metaphor, applying epistemic temperance, which is basically the intellectual humility to admit you do not know the full story, is having the discipline to take your foot off the gas when you realize your headlights are out.
I see. But if I slow down to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, aren't I just making myself completely vulnerable?
You are touching on a really critical balance. The risk of moving too fast in that digital vacuum is a false positive. Seeing malice where there is absolutely none.
What?
The temporal asymmetry of email means a perceived slight can fester in your head for 3 days over a long weekend, causing this massive social rupture over literally nothing. But on the flip side, a false negative is when you assume incompetence, but the person actually is out to get you.
Right. If I assume it was just a mistake when my coworker is actually actively gaslighting me, I am just giving them a free pass.
Exactly. And the cost of that false negative is the slow systemic erosion of psychological safety. If that curt reply was actually a deliberate microaggression and you constantly apply Hanlon's razor, you just reward the malicious actor.
You're training them.
Yes, you train them that zero context communication is a totally safe space for their hostility, and you invalidate your own emotional truth in the process.
That brings up a really great point. If the razor is this powerful but incredibly delicate cognitive tool, why do we constantly forget to use it when the pressure is really on?
Stress.
Yeah, the sources point to stress as the ultimate fracture point for our good intentions.
We mentioned epistemic temperance earlier, right? That courage to sit in the discomfort of not knowing. Well, it is very easy to be generous and patient when you are relaxed, but acute stress causes cognitive narrowing.
Cognitive narrowing.
Yeah, your brain redirects all of its processing power to immediate survival. You entirely lose the capacity for nuanced contextual thinking.
The example in the text that really stuck with me was the exhausted nurse.
Oh, that's a powerful one.
Yeah, they are coming off a grueling 12-hour shift. Their feet hurt. They're hungry. A colleague walks by and gives a really short, curt response to a question. The nurse instantly interprets it as gross disrespect. They completely miss the possibility that the colleague might have just received devastating personal news.
Right. Stress increases attribution asymmetry. We default back to blaming the person's character rather than investigating their situation,
Right.
which is the exact opposite of what the razor asks us to do.
So the sources talk about how leading organizational cultures try to fix this stress-induced bias by literally institutionalizing generosity.
Yes.
Like, they put positive intent framing prompts at the start of meetings. They enforce structured causal generosity in postmortems.
Meaning they literally force the team to map out benign intent and systemic constraints on a whiteboard before anyone is allowed to assign blame for a failure. They even assess managers on interpretive leadership.
Which is what, exactly?
It's evaluating how well managers guide their teams away from hostile assumptions during a crisis.
But again, I have to challenge this corporate utopia. Doesn't mandating causal generosity in every single meeting risk making a company just incredibly bureaucratic? I mean, if a marketing team has to spend 20 minutes listing benign excuses every time someone misses a critical deadline, when do they actually get around to holding someone accountable? The work still has to get done.
And that is the critical vulnerability of institutionalizing this practice. It is meant to be an initial assessment phase, right? A way to clear the air and lower cortisol so you can look at the facts. But if you stop there, it becomes incredibly dangerous.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because my pushback perfectly tees up the central paradox of the sources. What happens when this interpretive generosity is weaponized by bad actors?
It leads to a phenomenon the author calls complicity laundering.
Complicity laundering. I love that term.
It is the dark side of Hanlon's razor. When leaders constantly use the razor to excuse a team member's repeated damaging failures, saying things like, well, they didn't mean any harm, their heart is in the right place, they're just a little disorganized, it creates a massive competency accountability vacuum.
So the razor stops being a diagnosis. It becomes a termination of the investigation.
Precisely. The distinction between malice and incompetence is only meaningful if incompetence carries actual consequences. If it doesn't, the label of incompetence becomes a shield.
Right.
Leaders use it to deflect from their own bad hiring decisions or their absolute refusal to manage out poor performers. They protect a preferred individual by dressing up chronic underperformance as something the rest of the team should just be, benevolent about.
Man, the freezing complicity laundering just makes me think of a terrible landlord.
How so?
Imagine a landlord who refuses to fix a leaky roof for like 5 years. Finally, the ceiling collapses and ruins all the tenants' furniture. If the landlord says, oh, what an unpredictable weather anomaly, I'm so sorry nature did this to you, they are laundering their own complicity.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
They are blaming the system to cover up their deliberate negligence. It is literally an organizational cover-up dressed up as compassion.
Yes. And that creates a toxicity loop within the company. The
Ugh.
culture begins to tolerate incompetence as a virtue of patience. The person making the errors walks away unchanged, while the hardworking people bearing the cost of those errors walk away injured and burnt out.
And angry.
Very angry. And worse, if an employee raises a valid complaint about the burden they are carrying, they are silenced. They're labeled uncharitable or told they aren't being a team player.
That is wild. You are manipulated into feeling guilty for wanting people to actually do their jobs?
Which is why the rule in the source material is unequivocal on this. In workplace ethics, impact must always be weighted at least as heavily as intent. A systemic pattern of incompetence damages an organization just as much as intentional sabotage.
So the razor becomes dangerous when it enables repeated workplace incompetence. But the sources argue it completely shatters when we scale it up past the office to massive institutions and, high-stakes warfare.
Yeah, Hanlon's razor assumes linear causality and singular agency.
Meaning one person making one distinct mistake.
Exactly. But in complex systems, that dissolves. What looks like individual incompetence is often emergent stupidity or rational incompetence.
Okay, how does that work? The text gave a hospital example, but walk me through the mechanism. How does a hospital become rationally incompetent?
Think of a massive hospital network. The procurement department makes a highly rational decision to switch to a cheaper brand of surgical gloves to save money.
Makes sense.
Right. And then the scheduling department makes a rational decision to shorten shift overlaps to reduce overtime. The IT department delays a software update to prevent midday downtime. None of these people are stupid or malicious.
They're all just doing their jobs.
But when those isolated rational decisions aggregate at the level of an emergency room nurse, The gloves tear, the shift handoff is incredibly rushed, the system lags, and patient care degrades catastrophically. The razor would lead you to say, the hospital leadership is just short-sighted or stupid.
But systems theory shows us that the failure wasn't a mistake. It was an emergent property of the system's design.
Exactly. Furthermore, massive institutions can weaponize this structural ambiguity. The source calls it malice by architecture.
Oh.
Think of a massive corporation designing a customer service system that puts you on hold for 3 hours and then randomly drops your call. They diffuse culpability across this labyrinth of automated menus so that a deliberate, targeted outcome, which is making you give up on your refund, just looks like collective bureaucratic incompetence.
They want you to think it's broken. And in high-stakes environments like the military, finance, or critical infrastructure adversaries are literally counting on us, using Hanlon's razor against ourselves.
In contested environments, assuming incompetence first is a fatal flaw. Adversaries actively mask their attacks as glitches.
Right, because it buys them time.
Yes. GPS spoofing that sends a ship off course, misrouted secure communications, high-frequency fat finger trades that mysteriously crash financial markets. Adversaries want analysts to dismiss these irregularities as standard IT incompetence. The SolarWinds hack is a prime historical example where initial irregularities were overlooked as system errors rather than a coordinated breach.
So in those arenas, the razor has to be totally inverted. Malice must be the null hypothesis.
Operational security demands a two-channel analysis. You have to investigate both incompetence and malice simultaneously with predefined behavioral thresholds.
You don't just wait around to see if it was a mistake.
No, absolutely not. If a server goes down once, maybe it's a glitch. If 3 specific servers experience a coincidental failure within 24 hours, that predefined threshold triggers an automatic counterintelligence escalation.
This makes me wonder about our own lives, though. I mean, most of us aren't tracking state-sponsored hackers, but we do deal with toxic people. The source talks about the behavioral signature of predation. How can a listener use that to spot a malicious gaslighter who is just hiding behind the excuse of, oops, I'm just clumsy?
You have to look for specific behavioral red flags that deviate from normal human error. The first is pattern repetition with no learning curve. True incompetence usually involves sporadic errors that get corrected when you provide guidance. Malicious actors exhibit persistent identical failures despite really clear feedback.
They never seem to actually learn from the mistake, no matter how many times you explain it to them.
Right. The second red flag is simulated incompetence. They might strategically stage a misstep to appear reckless rather than sinister. They're hoping to drop pity or annoyance rather than suspicion. But the absolute most crucial indicator is benefit asymmetry.
Benefit asymmetry. Does that mean we look at who actually profits from the mistake?
That is it, exactly. True incompetence yields no discernible personal gain. If I accidentally delete our shared presentation, well, I have to stay up late fixing it too. It is just a mistake. But malicious intent, even when perfectly disguised as a mistake, results in a direct, disproportionate benefit to the individual making the error.
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
Right.
that is the exact mechanism nations use to mask cyber attacks. They create a localized error that just happens to systematically advance their strategic goals while throwing up their hands and claiming it was an accident.
It is the exact same dynamic, whether it is a coworker sabotaging your project to get a promotion or a state-sponsored hacker probing a power grid.
That is so crazy.
The asymmetry is the ultimate tell. When confronted, a genuinely incompetent person sincerely apologizes, they feel embarrassed, and they try to fix the damage. A malicious actor gaslights you, they shift the blame to the system, or they manufacture a brand new crisis to distract you. When a colleague's behavior consistently favors their own interest while defying logic or accountability, it is not incompetence, it is predation.
Okay, so we are in a really tight spot here. We can't safely assume incompetence because of complicity laundering and the threat of predation. But if we accuse someone of malice, we trigger an amygdala hijack and start a massive fight. What is the middle ground? How do we navigate this paradox without being naive or paranoid?
Well, the sources say we have to look at the diplomat's playbook.
Right.
Diplomats operate in a highly volatile space where relying on Hanlon's razor makes you look dangerously naive, but implying malice starts an actual war, so they discard the binary entirely. They replace the binary of malice versus incompetence with a spectrum, intentionality versus systemic friction.
Systemic friction. By changing the vocabulary, it completely decouples the outcome from the person's core character.
It creates emotional distance. Before they even gather evidence, diplomats assume a communication asymmetry. They look at the offending action and ask themselves, what internal constraint or external pressure made this action seem completely rational to them in the moment?
That is such a good question.
And then, to test the waters, they use low signal inquiry.
Give me an example of that in a normal office. Because normally I would storm over and say, why did you miss the deadline and leave me hanging?
And that triggers their defense mechanisms instantly. A low signal inquiry would be saying something like, I noticed a discrepancy in the timeline. Help me understand the sequence of events from Tuesday onward.
Oh, I see. You remove the you and focus entirely on the timeline.
Yes. It avoids the attack-defense cycle. If it truly is an anomaly, the diplomat leans towards systemic friction. If they spot a pattern, they deploy an intent testing matrix using conditional hypotheticals. This provides a golden bridge to back down.
What does a conditional hypothetical look like?
It is proposing a scenario that forces the other party to reveal their underlying motive without a direct accusation. For example, if we were to adjust the project scope to remove your bottleneck, how would that impact your delivery by Friday?
Ah,
If they are just overwhelmed, they will eagerly accept the solution. If they are intentionally stalling to sabotage the project, they will invent a new, unrelated excuse.
the text mentions that the final goal of this playbook is a negotiation pivot. You stop looking for apologies and you start looking for the core interest. The dialogue shifts from, why did you hurt me, to, what do you actually hope to gain? I have to say this is incredibly empowering for the listener's everyday life.
It really is.
By shifting to this spectrum, you stop being a passive victim of someone else's mysterious, toxic intent. You become an active, objective investigator of their interests.
It changes the entire dynamic. You preserve the dignity of the actor while fiercely protecting the integrity of the system and protecting yourself.
So what does this all mean? We have traveled a massive distance on this deep dive. We started with the literal neurochemical cortisol spikes in our own brains when reading a one-word email. We navigated the hidden toxicity of complicity laundering in the office. We scaled up to the null hypothesis required in high-stakes cyber warfare, and finally landed on the elegant, matrix-driven solutions of international diplomats. Hanlon's razor isn't a universal truth. It is a highly calibrated cognitive tool. You should use it to shut off your internal fire alarm and build golden bridges, absolutely. But always, always keep your eyes peeled for that benefit asymmetry.
This raises an important question, though. One, the source material points toward at the very end, but leaves wide open for the future. As we move rapidly into an era dominated by artificial intelligence, how will Hanlon's razor apply to machines?
Oh, wow. I hadn't even thought of that.
If a highly advanced black box AI makes a catastrophic error, say misdiagnosing patients or crashing a logistics grid due to misaligned training data, do we attribute that to algorithmic incompetence? Or does a line between systemic friction and emergent malice completely disappear when human intent is no longer in the driver's seat?
That is a terrifying and fascinating thought to leave on. How do you build a golden bridge for an algorithm? So tomorrow, when you get that one-word text or that curt email, remember to turn your headlights on and check your own neurochemistry before you assume there are monsters in the dark. But also, use your conditional hypotheticals to make sure someone isn't deliberately leading you off a cliff. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and keep questioning the world around you.